The funeral home was quiet except for the soft sound of crying. Sarah Chen stood in the corner of the room, her black dress making her look even smaller than her 17 years. Her eyes never left her father's face as he lay peacefully in the dark wooden coffin at the front of the room. Just last week, everything had been normal. Her father, Michael Chen, had been making breakfast as usual, telling his silly dad jokes that made Sarah roll her eyes but smile anyway. Now he was gone forever, taken by a sudden heart attack that no one had seen coming. The doctors said it was quick. He probably didn't feel much pain, but that thought didn't make Sarah feel any better. "It's time for the final viewing," the funeral director announced softly. His voice echoed in the quiet room, making several people jump slightly. Sarah watched as relatives and friends slowly walked up to say their last goodbyes. Her mother had already gone up earlier, touching her husband's face one last time before breaking down in tears. Now she sat in the front row, supported by Sarah's Aunt Jenny. Sarah's feet felt heavy as she waited her turn. Her mind kept going back to their last real conversation, or rather, their last argument. It had happened just 2 days before his death, and the memory of it made her stomach hurt. "Dad, I want to study art in college," she had told him during dinner. "I've already started working on my portfolio." Her father's face had changed immediately. "Art? Sarah, we talked about this. It's not a stable career. You're so good at science. Why not become a doctor or an engineer?" "But I don't want to be a doctor or an engineer." Sarah had raised her voice, something she rarely did. "Why can't you understand that I have my own dreams?" She had stormed up to her room after that, slamming the door like a child. The next morning, they had barely spoken to each other. Sarah had left for school without saying goodbye, thinking she would talk to him when she felt less angry, but she never got the chance. Now, as the line moved forward, Sarah could see more details of her father's face. He was wearing his favorite blue tie, the one she had given him for Father's Day last year. His gray hair was neatly combed, and someone had put his glasses on him. He looked like he was sleeping, just like he used to do in his armchair after a long day at work. Finally, it was her turn. Sarah stepped forward slowly, aware of everyone's eyes on her. Her throat felt tight, and her eyes burned with tears she had been trying to hold back all day. As she got closer, she could smell the strange mix of flowers and something else, probably chemicals they had used. It made everything feel even more unreal. "Dad," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about our fight." Her hands gripped the edge of the coffin. "I should have listened to you. I should have told you I love you before I left for school that day." The tears were falling freely now, dropping onto her hands. Sarah didn't care who was watching anymore. She leaned down closer, wanting to memorize every detail of her father's face. His peaceful expression, the small scar on his chin from a childhood accident he used to tell her stories about, the laugh lines around his eyes that showed how much he had smiled in his life. "I miss you so much already," she continued softly. "Who's going to make terrible jokes at breakfast now? Who's going to pretend they don't see me when I sneak cookies before dinner?" Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Who's going to be there to tell me I can do anything, even when you didn't agree with my choices?" Without thinking, Sarah leaned down and hugged her father one last time. She didn't care about funeral etiquette or what people might think. This was her dad, and this was goodbye. As she embraced him, she could almost pretend he was just sleeping, that at any moment he would wrap his arms around her and tell her everything would be okay. But he didn't move. He remained still and cold, and Sarah felt the full weight of reality crash down on her. This really was the end. There would be no more arguments, no chance to make things right, no opportunity to show him that she could make him proud while following her own path. Or so she thought. Because what happened next would change everything. Something so amazing that Sarah would question whether she was dreaming. But that was just the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would bridge the gap between life and death, between father and daughter, in ways she could never have imagined. As Sarah's tears fell onto her father's face, something extraordinary happened. At first, it was just a slight tingling sensation in her fingertips where they touched his shoulder. Then, without warning, the funeral home around her disappeared completely. She found herself in a different place, a different time. The strange thing was, she wasn't herself anymore. She was looking through someone else's eyes, feeling someone else's feelings. She was her father. In this vision, he was standing in a hospital hallway. There was excitement and nervousness in his heart as a nurse walked toward him with a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Sarah realized with a start that she was experiencing the day of her own birth, seeing it through her father's eyes. "Mr. Chen," the nurse said, smiling, "would you like to meet your daughter?" The emotions that flooded through her were overwhelming. As her father held her newborn self for the first time, she felt everything he had felt: pure love, fierce protectiveness, and a joy so intense it brought tears to his eyes. She felt his hands trembling as he carefully cradled the small bundle. "Hello, Sarah," he whispered. "I'm your Baba. I promise I'll always protect you." The scene changed suddenly. Now she was chasing a toddler version of herself around their old apartment. Little Sarah was laughing, running away with his car keys clutched in her tiny hands. Instead of being angry, he was filled with amusement and pride at how clever his little girl was becoming. Another shift, and she was sitting beside a hospital bed where 6-year-old Sarah lay with a broken arm, the result of trying to fly off the playground swing. The guilt and worry he felt were crushing, but there was also amazement at how brave his daughter was, not crying even once during the doctor's examination. The visions kept coming, faster now. She saw herself growing up through his eyes: her first day of school, her first art competition, her first heartbreak. With each memory came his emotions, his thoughts, his deep and endless love for her. Even during their arguments and disagreements, the love never wavered. It was always there, constant and unconditional. Suddenly, Sarah was back in the funeral home, gasping for air. Her hands were still on her father's shoulder, and only a few seconds had passed, though it felt like she had lived through years of memories. Her Aunt Jenny rushed forward to steady her as she swayed on her feet. "Sarah, honey, are you okay?" Jenny asked, concern clear in her voice. "You went very pale for a moment there." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. How could she explain what had just happened? That she had somehow experienced her father's memories, felt his emotions, seen herself through his loving eyes? They would think she was crazy with grief. But she knew what she had experienced was real. The memories were too vivid, too detailed to be her imagination. She could still feel echoes of his emotions: the overwhelming love, the pride, the constant worry about her future that came from a place of deep caring, not disappointment. "I'm fine," she managed to say at last. I just needed a moment." As her aunt led her back to her seat, Sarah's mind was racing. What had just happened? Was it some kind of miracle? A gift? Or was she really just imagining things because she missed him so much? But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Something inside her had changed. There was a warmth in her chest, like a small flame that hadn't been there before. It felt like a connection, a bridge between her and her father that somehow stretched beyond death itself. Sarah sat down next to her mother, her heart pounding. She wanted to share what had happened, but how could she explain it? How could she tell anyone that for a few precious moments, she had lived inside her father's memories, had felt his love for her in a way that no words could ever describe? As the funeral service continued around her, Sarah touched her face where the tears had fallen. Something amazing had happened, something impossible to explain. And somehow, she knew there was more to come. This wasn't just a one-time miracle. It was the start of something extraordinary. Her father might be gone from this world, but he had left her something incredible. She just didn't know yet how deep this connection would go, or how it would change her life forever. 3 days after the funeral, Sarah sat alone in her room, staring at her father's old watch on her desk. Her mother had given it to her yesterday, saying that he would have wanted her to have it. The simple black leather band was worn from years of use, and the glass face had a tiny scratch in the corner. As she reached out to touch it, another vision hit her suddenly, just like at the funeral. This time, she was in her father's office. He was sitting at his desk, looking at this same watch while talking on the phone. Through his eyes, she saw him checking the time, 2:45 p.m. He was worried about being late for Sarah's art show at school. His boss was asking him to stay late for an important meeting. "I'm sorry, sir," she felt him say firmly, "but I promised my daughter I would be there. Family comes first." The memory shifted, and she felt the pride that filled his heart as he sat in the school auditorium, watching young Sarah explain her painting to the judges. Even though he had risked making his boss angry, the joy on his daughter's face made it all worth it. The vision faded, leaving Sarah with tears in her eyes. She hadn't known about that phone call. She had just been happy that he had made it to her show on time. Later that evening, while helping her mother clean the kitchen, Sarah found herself holding her dad's favorite coffee mug. The moment her fingers touched the chip on its rim, another memory flooded her mind. She was now experiencing a morning from 2 years ago. Her father was making coffee, worried about how to talk to teenage Sarah about her falling grades in math. He didn't want to be too harsh, remembering how his own father's strict approach had only made him rebellious. As he planned what to say, she felt his deep love and concern. He wasn't angry about the grades. He was worried that she might be struggling and afraid to ask for help. The memory showed him carefully choosing his words over breakfast, offering to help her study instead of scolding her like his father would have done. When Sarah came back to the present, she nearly dropped the mug. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you remember when my math grades dropped in ninth grade?" Her mother nodded, wiping a dish. "Yes, your father helped you study after dinner every day for weeks. You brought your grade up to a B+ by the end of the term." Sarah swallowed hard. "He never yelled at me about it. He just helped." "That was your father's way," her mother said softly. "He learned from his own father's mistakes. He always wanted to be better for you." That night, more memories came to Sarah in her dreams. She saw herself through her father's eyes at different ages, riding a bike, graduating middle school, getting her driver's license. But these weren't just random memories. Each one carried a lesson, a piece of wisdom he had wanted to share with her. In one memory, she saw him watching her practice drawing late at night when she should have been sleeping. Instead of being angry, he felt proud of her dedication. But he also worried that she wasn't taking care of herself, working too hard without balance. She felt his desire to teach her about self-care, about finding harmony between passion and well-being. In another flash, she experienced the night of their last argument about art school, but this time she felt his inner struggle. He wasn't against her dreams, he was scared for her. Images of his own youth flashed through his mind, of giving up his love for photography because his family needed him to have a stable job. He didn't want Sarah to face the same hard choices, the same regrets. As Sarah woke up the next morning, she realized these visions weren't just memories. They were messages. Her father was sharing things he had never had the chance to tell her, wisdom he had wanted to pass on. Each memory was carefully chosen, like pieces of a puzzle that were slowly coming together. She grabbed her journal and started writing everything down, afraid she might forget some detail. These weren't just random glimpses into the past. They were her father's final gift to her, a way of guiding her even after he was gone. And somehow, she knew there was still more to come. A week after the funeral, Sarah was helping her mother clean out her father's home office. She opened his old desk drawer and found a dusty leather wallet she had never seen before. When she picked it up, the now familiar wave of memories washed over her. Suddenly, she was 20-year-old Michael Chen, standing in front of an art gallery in downtown Shanghai. Through his eyes, she saw beautiful photographs hanging in the window. His heart beat faster as he looked at the "Now Hiring" sign. This was his chance to become a real photographer, to follow his dream. But then the vision shifted. Now she felt the heavy weight in his chest as he read a letter from home. His parents were struggling financially. His younger sister needed money for college. The photography job wouldn't pay enough to help them. The next memory showed him accepting a job at a big technology company instead. The salary was good, the benefits were better, but his camera was packed away in a box. Sarah felt his sadness as he watched his dreams slip away, one day at a time. The vision changed again. Now he was older, married to Sarah's mother, standing in a hospital hallway. Money was tight, and a baby was on the way. He looked at his old camera, still in its box, and made the final decision to sell it. His family needed the money more than he needed his dreams. When Sarah came back to the present, tears were rolling down her face. "Mom," she called out, her voice shaking. "Did you know Dad wanted to be a photographer?" Her mother stopped dusting and sat down slowly in the office chair. "Yes, he loved taking pictures when we first met. He was really good at it too, but he gave it up to support his family." Sarah opened the old wallet with trembling hands. Inside, she found a faded photograph. It showed a much younger version of her father, standing proudly next to a display of his photographs in what looked like a school art show. As soon as she touched the photograph, another memory hit her. This time, she was her father just 6 months ago. He was sitting in his office late at night, looking at Sarah's college art portfolio on her laptop. She felt his complex emotions, pride in her talent, fear for her future, and a deep, aching regret about his own abandoned dreams. "I don't want her to give up like I did," she heard him whisper to himself, "but I don't want her to struggle either." Now Sarah understood. Her father's opposition to her art school plans wasn't because he didn't believe in her. It was because he knew exactly how hard it was to choose between following your dreams and being practical. He had made that choice himself, and it had hurt him deeply. Later that evening, Sarah sat in her room, looking at the old photograph of her father. She remembered all their arguments about her future, but now she saw them differently. Every time he had questioned her choice to study art, it wasn't because he doubted her talent. It was because he was trying to protect her from the pain he had experienced. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, touching the photograph gently. "You were just scared for me, weren't you?" As if in response to her words, one final memory appeared. She was her father again, watching her draw in the living room. She felt his pride, his worry, and something else. Hope. Hope that his daughter might achieve what he couldn't. Hope that she might be strong enough to face the challenges he had run from. When Sarah opened her eyes, she knew what she had to do. She walked to her desk and pulled out her art school application. Her father had given up his dreams to support his family. But maybe, just maybe, she could live her dreams for both of them. She looked at his photograph one more time. "I won't give up, Dad," she promised. "I'll find a way to make it work. I'll be brave enough for both of us." The photograph seemed to warm slightly in her hands, as if her father had heard her promise. Sarah smiled through her tears, finally understanding that his love for her had always been about protecting her dreams, not destroying them. She just hadn't been able to see it until now. One rainy Saturday morning, 2 weeks after discovering the old wallet, Sarah decided to explore the attic. Her mother had mentioned that some of her father's old things were stored up there. As she climbed the creaky ladder, dust particles danced in the beam of her flashlight. The attic was filled with boxes, old furniture, and forgotten memories. Sarah moved carefully between the stacks, reading the labels her father had written in his neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, tax papers, college books. Then she saw a box marked simply Art. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, beneath some old newspapers, she found a leather-bound sketchbook. The moment her fingers touched its worn cover, she was pulled into another memory. She was her father, sitting alone in this same attic 20 years ago. Through his eyes, she watched his hands open this sketchbook. Page after page was filled with beautiful drawings, landscapes, portraits, city scenes. Some were done in pencil, others in charcoal or ink. She felt his pride in these drawings, but also his deep sadness. The memory shifted to him adding new sketches over the years, always in secret, always late at night when everyone else was asleep. These drawings were his private escape, a small way to keep his artistic dreams alive while working his office job during the day. Back in the present, Sarah opened the sketchbook with shaking hands. The pages were filled with art she had never seen before. Her father had never shown these to anyone. Many of the drawings were unfinished, a half-completed bridge, a portrait missing its final details, a landscape with blank spaces waiting to be filled. As she turned each page, more memories flooded her mind. She experienced moments of her father working on each drawing, felt his joy in creating them, and his regret at never having enough time to finish them properly. One memory showed him starting a drawing of Sarah when she was small, playing in their backyard. He had captured her childish joy perfectly, but the background remained empty. She felt his frustration at having to stop because it was late, and he had an early meeting the next day. Another memory revealed him working on a series of sketches for a children's book he had wanted to write. The story was about a little girl who could fly, and the drawings were full of wonder and imagination. But like so many others, these two remained unfinished, dreams set aside for more practical matters. Sarah found a more recent drawing toward the back of the book. It showed her at her school art show last year, standing proudly next to her painting. The sketch was beautiful but incomplete. He had never had the chance to finish it. Tears fell onto the pages as Sarah realized something important. Her father hadn't just given up photography. He had found another way to express his creativity through drawing. But he had kept it hidden, maybe feeling that he didn't have the right to pursue art when he had chosen a different path. Suddenly, another memory came, stronger than the others. She was her father, sitting in his office just a month before his death. He was looking at this same sketchbook, thinking about all his unfinished work. But this time, she felt something different in his heart, not just regret, but hope. He was thinking about Sarah, about her determination to pursue art despite his warnings. She felt his growing realization that maybe, just maybe, she could succeed where he had hesitated. That through her, the artistic legacy he had kept hidden might finally find its voice. When the memory faded, Sarah hugged the sketchbook to her chest. "I understand now, Dad," she whispered into the quiet attic. "You never really gave up on art. You just couldn't find a way to make it work back then." She looked through the sketchbook one more time, touching each unfinished drawing gently. These weren't just abandoned projects. They were pieces of her father's soul, waiting for the right moment to be completed. As she closed the book, Sarah made another promise to herself and to her father. Somehow, she would find a way to finish what he had started. These drawings wouldn't remain incomplete forever. Through her, his artistic dreams would finally find their ending. 3 weeks after finding the sketchbook, Sarah sat at her desk late one night, surrounded by her father's drawings. She had spent hours studying his art style, trying to understand his techniques. Each time she touched a drawing, new memories would flow into her mind, showing her exactly how he had created them. Tonight, she was looking at his unfinished sketch of the flying girl from his children's book idea. As her fingers traced the pencil lines, the familiar wave of memories washed over her. She was now her father, sitting at this same desk years ago. Through his eyes, she watched his hands move across the paper, felt the exact pressure he used on the pencil to create light and shadow. She experienced his thought process as he chose which details to add and which to leave out. But this time, something was different. Instead of just watching the memory, Sarah felt like she could guide it. When she opened her eyes, she found herself holding a pencil, and her hand seemed to know exactly what to do. It was as if her father was working through her, showing her how to complete his unfinished drawing. "This is amazing," Sarah whispered, watching her hand move across the paper with a confidence she had never felt before. She was combining her own style with his techniques, creating something that belonged to both of them. The next morning, Sarah's mother found her asleep at her desk. When she saw the completed drawing, her eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," she said softly, "this looks just like your father's work, but different. Better, somehow." Sarah smiled tiredly. "He's teaching me, Mom. Through these memories, he's showing me everything he learned about art." Her mother picked up the drawing carefully. "You know, your father used to talk about this story idea, a little girl who could fly because she believed in herself so strongly. He never finished it because—" She paused, wiping her eyes. "Because he stopped believing in himself." That afternoon, Sarah experienced another powerful memory while holding her father's old paintbrush. She saw him watching her draw when she was 13, feeling his desire to share his own art with her. But fear and shame held him back. How could he encourage her artistic dreams when he had abandoned his own? The memory shifted to him hiding his sketchbook when she entered his office, pretending to be busy with work papers. She felt his regret in that moment, his wish to connect with her through art, but not knowing how. "Oh, Dad," Sarah said out loud, "we could have shared this. We wasted so much time." But even as she said it, she realized something important. They were sharing it now. Through these supernatural experiences, she and her father were having all the conversations they should have had when he was alive. He was teaching her, guiding her, sharing his knowledge and experience in a way that went beyond words. That evening, Sarah started a new drawing. As she worked, more memories flowed through her, techniques her father had learned, mistakes he had made, lessons he had discovered. Each memory was like a gift, a piece of artistic wisdom passed from father to daughter. Her mother watched from the doorway as Sarah worked, amazed at how her daughter's style had changed. "You're drawing just like him," she said. "But also, not like him. It's as if you'd taken his best parts and made them your own." Sarah nodded, not looking up from her work. "That's exactly what's happening, Mom. Dad and we're finally working together. He's not just showing me his memories anymore. He's teaching me everything he never had the chance to share when he was alive." As she worked late into the night, Sarah felt closer to her father than ever before. Each stroke of her pencil, each technique she learned from his memories, was healing the gap between them. Their argument about art school seemed so far away now, replaced by this deep artistic connection that transcended death itself. "We're finishing your story together, Dad," she whispered as she added the final touches to her drawing. All your unfinished dreams. They're not going to stay unfinished anymore. 1 month after discovering the sketchbook, Sarah sat in her father's office chair, looking at all the artwork spread across his desk. She had spent weeks completing his unfinished drawings, each one teaching her something new. But something still felt incomplete, like there was one final message waiting to be discovered. Her mother knocked on the door, holding a small box. "Sarah, I found this in Dad's closet. It has your name on it." The box was wrapped in simple brown paper with "For Sarah, when the time is right" written on top in her father's handwriting. As soon as Sarah touched it, the strongest memory yet overwhelmed her. She was her father, sitting in this same office just 1 week before his death. His chest felt tight, the first warning signs of the heart attack that would take his life, but we didn't know it then. He was writing a letter, trying to find the right words to tell Sarah everything in his heart. Through his eyes, she watched him place the letter in this box, along with something else, a small key. She felt his thoughts as clearly as if they were her own. "I hope someday she'll understand why I pushed her so hard. I hope she'll know it was always because I loved her too much to watch her make my mistakes." Back in the present, Sarah opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was the letter, and beneath it, a small silver key. The moment she touched the letter, the final memory began. She was her father again, but this time she was experiencing his last conscious thoughts in the hospital. The heart attack had come suddenly at work. As he lay there, machines beeping around him, his mind was filled with regret, not about his job or his abandoned art, but about Sarah. He was thinking about their argument over art school, wishing he had told her the whole truth. Yes, he had worried about her future, but not because he doubted her talent. He had worried because he saw so much of himself in her, the same passion, the same dreams. He had been afraid that life would force her to give up her art just as it had forced him. But in these final moments, he realized something important. Sarah was stronger than he had been. She had fought for her dreams while he had surrendered his. His last thought was a prayer that she would keep that strength, that she wouldn't let fear stop her like it had stopped him. The memory faded, and Sarah found herself crying as she read the letter. "Dear Sarah, if you're reading this, I hope you've already found my sketchbook. The key in this box opens the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside, you'll find my life savings, money I've been putting aside for years. I told myself it was for emergencies, but really, I think I was saving it for this moment. I wanted to give you what I never had, the freedom to chase your dreams without fear. Use this money for art school. Use it to build the life you want, not the life you think you should have. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to tell you this in person. I'm sorry I let my own fears and regrets get in the way of supporting your dreams. But know this, every time I questioned your choice to study art, it wasn't because I didn't believe in you. It was because I believed in you so much that I was terrified of seeing you hurt like I was. You are so much stronger than I ever was, Sarah. You fight for what you want instead of just accepting what life gives you. Keep that strength. Keep that passion. Don't let anything, not even your old dad's fears, stop you from following your heart. I love you more than you'll ever know. Dad." Sarah held the letter close to her chest, tears falling freely. Now she understood everything, his fears, his love, his final wishes. Through these supernatural experiences, he had shown her not just his memories, but his deepest truths. She took the key and opened the desk drawer. Inside was a substantial savings account book, enough to cover her art school tuition. But more importantly, there was also his blessing, his true, unafraid blessing, to follow her dreams. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for everything. For believing in me, even when you were scared. For loving me enough to save me from your regrets. I promise I won't waste this gift." 3 months after finding her father's letter, Sarah stood in the local art gallery surrounded by her first exhibition. The walls were covered with artwork that told a unique story, the story of a father and daughter connected through art and love, even after death. The main wall featured the completed children's book illustrations from her father's original idea about the flying girl. Sarah had finished all of them, combining his style with her own. Each drawing showed the little girl soaring higher and higher, believing in herself more with each page. Visitors stopped to admire how the art seemed to blend two different styles perfectly, the experienced hand of an older artist with the fresh energy of a younger one. In the center of the gallery hung the piece Sarah was most proud of. It was her father's unfinished sketch of her at the school art show, but now it was complete. She had finished it using everything she had learned from his memories, adding colors and details that made it come alive. Below it was a small sign that read, "Collaboration by Michael and Sarah Chen." Sarah's mother stood nearby, greeting guests with tears in her eyes. She watched as people stopped to look at each piece, pointing out the beautiful mix of styles. Nobody else knew the incredible truth that these artworks were created through a supernatural connection between father and daughter. "Your father would be so proud," her mother whispered, squeezing Sarah's hand. Just then, Sarah's art school acceptance letter arrived on her phone. As she opened the email with trembling fingers, she felt the familiar warm sensation that meant another memory was coming. But this time, it was different. Instead of seeing a moment from the past, she found herself experiencing what felt like her father's presence right now, in this moment. It wasn't a memory. It was as if he was standing beside her, seeing his dreams and hers come together in this gallery. Through this connection, she felt his overwhelming joy and pride. She felt his amazement at how she had taken his unfinished works and transformed them into something new and beautiful. Most of all, she felt his love, stronger and clearer than ever before. "I got in, Dad," she whispered. "I'm going to art school, and I promise I'll make the most of it." An elderly man stopped in front of the flying girl illustrations. "These are remarkable," he said, adjusting his glasses. "There's something magical about them, like two artists working as one." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what they are," she replied. "My father started them, and I finished them. We just needed a little miracle to work together." As the evening went on, more people arrived at the gallery. Sarah's art teacher from school came, beaming with pride. Even her father's old boss showed up, surprised to learn that his former employee had been such a talented artist. Near the end of the night, a young girl stood in front of the flying girl illustrations, her eyes wide with wonder. "How did you make her look so free?" she asked Sarah. Sarah knelt down beside her. "My father taught me that the most important thing in art is to believe in yourself. When you do that, it's like you can fly." As she said these words, she felt one last wave of her father's presence. This time, she understood that it was saying goodbye. She had learned what he needed to teach her. She had found her path. Now she could walk it on her own, carrying his love and wisdom in her heart. Later, after all the guests had left, Sarah stood alone in the gallery. She touched the frame of their collaborative piece gently. The supernatural connection that had started at his funeral had given her something precious, not just memories or art techniques, but a deeper understanding of her father's love. "Thank you for everything, Dad," she said softly. "For the memories, the lessons, the truth, and most of all, for believing in me." As she turned to leave, she felt at peace. Their story had found its ending, but in many ways, it was just the beginning. Through their shared art, her father would always be part of her journey, and somewhere she knew he was smiling, watching his daughter soar higher than he had ever dreamed possible.